Hello students and welcome to the week 9 example video. So for this week we're going to be starting with assemblies. So you will also notice that assemblies will not be assessed in any tests in this module. This is because we are only doing assemblies so that you are familiar with it if you want to use it in your project. We highly recommend using it in your project. However, we realize not everyone's computer will be able to handle assemblies and thus not everyone will be able to add it. But those of you who can, I highly encourage you to do so. Okay, so first you start by creating a new assembly. Okay, so new, then at model, we go to assembly. You'll see it's still a part file. It is what it is. Then we go to lesson. I'm going to make it over here because you have to create it in the folder where your parts which you want to create the assembly out of are located. Okay, so I'm going to call this week, I should turn caps lock off, week 9 example assembly. Okay, so I say okay, and there we go. Now I have an assembly, so automatically it will prompt me to start adding parts, but let me show you where to do that if it doesn't show that. So go to assemblies here at the top, and then you say add components. So new component, then it will prompt you to actually model a new component. We want to just add pre-existing models. Okay. So we go here to open, and automatically it will look, or it should look where you saved your file. If it doesn't, just navigate to that point. And now we want to add all of it. So select the first one, shift, select the last one. Okay, so okay. Now we have all the ones there, but we don't want to just add them all in one file swoop. Okay, so first we want to just add the base. Okay, so we say base, then select object, and now we can add it. So it doesn't really matter the orientation right now. I just want to put it in. So we put it in there, and we say okay. So now it asks me if I want to fix the component as it is the first part. I don't want to do that at the moment because it's not orientated correctly yet. So I want to be able to move it. So I'm just going to say no, and I'll fix it later. So let's move over to the footsack. Okay, so let's move over to the assembly drawing so that we can see what we should actually do for this assembly. Okay, so this assembly will look as follows. So it may look a bit chaotic at first, but let me quickly walk you through it. So this is the full assembly drawing, and then we have a few more detailed drawings. So this doesn't show an exploded view because it's quite a simple part. So you will be able to figure it out without having an exploded view. So each of these number bubbles, so we won't be creating this in class. You can go and figure out how to do that yourselves. There are a bunch of videos on YouTube on how to do that, but it's in the drafting environment, as you can obviously see. So each of these bubbles correspond to these parts, these numbered parts, in your drawing. So you can see, obviously, part 1 is the base. So you obviously want to add that one first. So you can see, okay, it's nice and vertical with that point over here showing, being up here and pointing in this direction. So let's first move that part a little bit. So we go to move component. So you have a bunch of different ways that in which you have words. So you have a bunch of different ways in which you can move a part. So you can move it by distance, by an angle, point to point. You should recognize some of these from synchronous modeling. However, most of the time you can just use dynamic. Okay, so select the component, specify orientation. So now you have all these handles. So I'm going to rotate it by clicking on that handle and moving my mouse 90 degrees. And then I'm going to rotate it using this one, 90 degrees. There we go, 90. And now it's the way I want it to be. Okay, so it's also not too important, at least for our purposes, to have the base part in a specific position with reference to the origin, as we won't be using center of mass and so on to assess you on this. As I said, we won't be assessing you on this in the tests, and in the homework we will work differently. So you can just add it arbitrarily, but keep it close to the origin. Otherwise, if you go like this, then it will most probably move your part, or the zooming will be weird. So just add it close. So then we can fix this part. So we go to the constraints. So these are your constraints. We also won't be using these, but play around with them. They are quite fun to play around with. So you can go to the fix constraint. So as you can see, it says fix this object in the current position. So whenever you're unsure what something does, just hover over it, and then NX will tell you what it does. So also in older versions of NX, you had next to move component a assembly constraints option, and then you had all of these and a few other ones which they now merged into single ones here that you had in a dialog window that you could use. So they changed that in this, at least changed that from, I believe it was 1980 something, the last one that I use assemblies in. So in the student edition, which is 20 something, I can't remember, they've changed it. So we click on fix, then we click on the object, and we say, okay, there we go, now it's fixed. So now if we try to move it, it won't. So trying to move a fixed component, I should want to move it. No, obviously, because it's fixed. So we just cancel. Okay. So now we can see what's the next part. So the next one is, so this is also in the order that it was added. You can change this order, but I don't think, yeah, so this was just added arbitrarily. So it doesn't really matter. We can just add all of the parts. Important in your homework, you will notice some of the parts, there's a 2 here, not a 1. So obviously then you should add multiple of those parts, but I'll show you how to do that. So we go to add components, and now I want to add the rest of the parts. So there are not too many parts right now, so I can just add all of them at once and figure it out from there. So if you want to add, let's say, one cylinder connector, and you want to add 2 large links, so then you can't add it all at once, you have to do them separately. So if you want to add 2 of a part, you can just say, okay, count, and then you select multiple, 2, 3, 4, whatever, 5, and then you just add them, and it will add all of them. But for all of these, you just want to add 1. So I'm just going to add 1 of them, and the location doesn't really matter. You see, they're all sprawled out. So I'm just going to put them there. Doesn't really matter because I'm going to be moving them anyway. Okay, so now I can start assembling. Okay, so let's first see. So I know this blue part should come in front of the green one, and here the green one has holes and the blue one has pins, so clearly they're supposed to interface with one another. Okay, so part of creating assemblies in NX, especially when it's an assembly that someone or parts someone else created and you have to assemble, just apply common sense. Okay, so I'm first going to move this component close-ish to where I want it. So this at least on the right side of the green part or the base part. I'll just move it over here, and yeah, it's close enough. Okay. Also, something that changed in, or since the previous version of NX I did assemblies in, is now that they don't just snap parts to where you constrain them to. They sort of move them slowly, which looks kind of cool and is also useful. So now you actually see what NX is doing. So if it breaks, you actually know what broke. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to align these little holes with these holes, as that's what will happen in when you do it on a physical part. So I could also align these sides with these sides, but that's not very practical. You have to try to constrain it the way that it would be constrained physically, because then usually things go better, so it breaks less easily. Okay, so I'm going to say align, and then we're going to align the central axis of this to this axis. So you can see, okay, you don't see it move now because I was too zoomed in, but but now I can say okay, but still it can still move. It's still not nice and fixed because you see you can rotate like this around that point. So I need to add another constraint. So I'm going to go here again. I'm going to this. I'm going to select. Wait, let's move this part first, so that I can show you NX moving the part when you're constraining it. Okay. So then I'm going to say align. Now I'm going to align this center axis, is that one, to this one. And there you go. There you see NX moving it in line. There we go. So now, lastly, we can now just move it so that it is actually in line with this. So I'm going to align the inner face with the outer face. So now it shouts at me. So when NX does this, NX, for some reason, NX likes to complain. So if you do that, you see it made sense. I want to align this face to this face. What's its problem? The problem is it wants to spin this thing around and align that face with that one, with this blue part within the green part. I don't know why. So then you can just reverse the direction. And then it's like, oh, you want to do that? Okay, cool, I can do that. So yeah, sometimes NX thinks, but it doesn't think very well. Okay, so there we go. That part is now where it should be. Okay, so next, what we're going to use next. So let's quickly see on the side, we have this little hole, and that's where this part then interfaces. So as you can see, this like place where the groove does not exist, that's over there. So they should interface one another there. So I'm first going to align. So I'm going to choose this one. You can even use this one. It's the same central axis, doesn't really matter. And we're going to align it to this. And you see there, it moved it, but it moved it weird. So now it's within the other part. So you can just say, okay. And then we can just move it out of that part. So I'm going to, there we go. And now I'm going to do the same as with the blue part. I'm just going to align it. So align this to this. And it shouts at me again. And I say, don't worry about it. And there we go. Wonderful. Okay, but now you can see it's a bit rotated now. So you see it points downwards, which is not what we want. But let's first see if we can fix that with other constraints from the other parts before we start adding explicit constraints on it. Okay, so you don't want to add constraints that aren't necessary. Otherwise, you might run into conflicting constraints down the line. Okay, so next we're going to add the purple wheel. So for that, I'm going to say, okay, align again. So you'll notice, especially with rotating members, you use this align center axis a lot. So I'm going to select those two. Select the wrong thing, just click off and then select that. There we go. And it actually added it perfectly. Okay, so now let's just check what is actually aligned, because it may be in the correct position, but it may not be constrained there. There we go. So you see it was aligned, but it wasn't constrained there. So you must always check that it is fully constrained, just as you had to with sketches. So here you can see, let's try and figure this thing out. Okay, so this should sit flush. At least it looks like it should sit flush. So then what we can just do is we can say, okay, align this front face with this, and there we go. Now it sits nice and flush with that part. Okay, you can see, yeah, it sits nice. Okay, so now let's see what's the next part. So now you have these two arms that connect to both the green part and to the wheel, and they're connected to one another. Okay, so I'm first going to add the yellow arm to the purple wheel. So you can see it connects using this little nubbin there. So this would probably be a separate part that can be screwed in through this, but for sake of simplicity, it's just modeled into this part already. Okay, so once again, we're using same old, same old. So I'm also not caring which side, because it's just a simple link, or arm. So it's symmetric, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm aligning these two, and place it over there for some reason. So while I'm in the align tool, I can just say apply and just continue using the align tool. So I can say, okay, I want to align this face to this face. It shouts, and now it doesn't shout anymore. There we go. Does that look correct? That does look correct. It fits in nicely. Okay. Looks like there may be a little bit of... No, it doesn't look like it's overlapping. Sometimes NX parts, when they set flush, looks like they're overlapping a bit, but just look carefully, and if you see it doesn't actually overlap, it's fine. Okay, I'm just going to move this a little bit. Okay. The idea was to move only the yellow arm, but if I can move everything, that's probably fine as well. So let's actually try to, because you can see it should be on that side. So let's see if I click on this and then move it differently. So let's say if I move it like this, there we go. Now it moves to the side. And then I can rotate it down. There we go. Because we want to place the stuff in roughly the correct position already before you try to constrain the next part. Okay, so now I can constrain these two to one another. So again, just a link. So let's first see which one is in front of which. So here you can see, if I zoom in a bit there, the orange link is in front of the yellow one. So that's what we will do here as well. So I'm going to say align this face and this face. And now you see you did it wrong way around. So I'm just going to say no, the other way around. There we go. Okay. So then we're going to align this one with this one, like that. Say apply. And now we're going to align this with this. There we go. Now I can say, okay, this face should be aligned with this face, but you don't always have parts which are exactly the correct size. Obviously, in the real world, you have tolerances. So I'm going to use the center constraint. So I'm going to use 2 to 2, and then I'm going to say set 1. I'm going to say this face and this face, and then set 2 will be this face and this face. And there it moved it into position, and now it's centered around these two faces. So if there was a tolerance built in, so if the gap between that face and this face was larger than this distance, then it would sit nice in the middle, which just makes your assembly neat if you have toleranced parts. Okay, so now we're almost finished. Now we just need to add these two final ones. So let's quickly see. So this part over here, if you look on the inside, right, let's add a section view so that you can see, or clip section so that you can see easier. So let's quickly see, it's positioned there at the moment. So let's just move it this way. There we go. So now you can see it's a cylinder inside. Okay, so we need to align let's cancel. This part should be within that cylinder. It should run inside of it. So here you can see with this 50 displayed over here that this part is on the other side. Okay, and then this protrudes out here and then interfaces with that. Okay, so first I'm going to go and align the central axis of this. No, misclicked. Let's cancel and try again. Center axis to this thing's central axis. Okay. And oh, it actually did it correctly. Wonderful. If it were incorrect, you could just invert it, but it already did it correctly, so that's fine. You can say, okay. Now let's quickly move this in a little bit. So now you can see it also, let's see, I can't probably see there. It also aligned that actually quite nicely. So, but now these two are aligned, but also not constrained. So if I were to move this, okay, it wants to move that one as well, but that's not a guarantee. So let's quickly say, cancel on this first, discard changes. So let's say, for now, just I fixed that, and now it's yelling about something. And if we want to move this, let's see if it will allow us. Yes, it will allow us. So you see now it can move, it can clip through this. Okay, so you see that's what I meant with it was aligned, it moved together, but it wasn't constrained. So you must always make sure your parts are constrained. If you didn't say something should have a certain relation to another part, then it won't have that relation. Okay, so we can just say cancel, discard changes, and then we can just undo the fixed constraint. I just Control Z'd it. So first I'm going to add a center constraint again. So this time it's going to be 1, 2, 2. So I'm going to say, okay, the central axis of this cylinder should now be in the center of this face and this face. So now, let's say I fix this again, and this is going to shout at me because I fixed it and I fixed another thing, so don't worry about that for now. So now if I try to move this, it should not allow me. There we go. It doesn't allow me to move that, at least to rotate it. It obviously will still move like this. So discard changes. Now I can just delete this fixed constraint again because I don't need it. So just delete it. There we go. So now I can align the center axes of this, and hopefully, okay, it flipped it around, which is not correct. So just other way around. There we go. So now everything looks like it's nice and aligned, but first you need to make sure that it's nice and aligned. So if I try and move this, it will still move because I haven't fixed it in place yet, or I haven't specified a constraint yet. So this still needs to be changed. But if I try to move parts in a way that they're not supposed to move, then obviously, okay, it will still move side to side. But you must always just check that your parts actually are constrained properly. Okay, so you must basically try and break your assembly. And if it won't break, well then, wonderful. Obviously that's allowed motion. Okay, so this looks good. So now I just need to specify these points. Okay, so first there's a distance constraint that we can add. So for that we can use the clip section as well. So was it added from, okay, it was added from the outside edge to that part, but it's still easier to just clip a section, then you can properly select the parts. There we go. Okay, so I'm now going to add the distance constraint. So here we go. And I'm going to say from over here, because now I had to, if I didn't clip the section, I had to maneuver in between that little slit. Now I can easily select this, and I can select this. And now it says, okay, this is the current dimension. Now I want it to be 50, and then I can apply it. I can also set upper and lower limits so that a part can move, but only move within a certain range. So this won't be applied for this one, but for your homework example, there it can be easily applied, and I'll show you in class. But we won't do compulsory, but it's a nice thing to use if you don't want to accidentally break your part. Okay, so you can just say okay. So now that's 50. So I'm going to turn off the clip section, and now it looks much better, but it's still not fully constrained, because if I try to rotate this, it will rotate this part. Okay, so that's obviously not what we want. Okay, so you see, and also it sort of breaks it because it doesn't exactly know what it should do. Okay, so let's just put it back over here. Just say okay. So that's why we also have this angular constraint. Okay, 135 degrees. So now I can just go over here, angle, then we can say this face, and then you can constrain it with this center line, because it's a horizontal line, doesn't really matter. So you can just say that center line, and currently it's specified down there, which is weird. I don't want it specified down there. Let's see if I can, if I select it differently, if it will add it in differently. Let's see. No, it wants to do it that way. Or let's say reverse direction. No. Okay, so we had 135, but now it works at the bottom. So 180 minus 135. Like I said, never do the math yourself because you can make an error when you're just, humans make errors. So you can just say 180 minus 135. That way you know you can't make an error. Enter. And okay. So now the part should be completely constrained. So now you should be able to tug at anything and it shouldn't move. Okay, so you can see it doesn't move. Discard changes. Also, these parts that aren't actually connected to these things that I yanked, you can see it doesn't want to move. It's fixed in place. Okay, so there we go. And that's basic assemblies in NX. So it's very simple. But yeah, go around, play with stuff in NX, take this, try and build it differently. I didn't use all the constraints here. You can use them. For instance, you can use concentric. I've never had a situation where I had to use concentric. I know some other people use concentric instead of aligning center lines. I prefer aligning center lines. You can use this one to auto-align. I like explicitly telling NX what to align and not let it guess, because as you can see, it usually guesses incorrectly. Not usually, but it guesses incorrectly a lot. So then you have, you can align, you can specify things to be perpendicular, you can specify things to be parallel to one another. You can align lock. So it says here, it constrains the axes of selected objects to become aligned with the axis of the last selected object and locks the rotation about the axis. So you can do that. You can bond objects. So say, okay, no, they should move as a rigid set. So that might be useful in your project. So if you want to create stuff and you can't really constrain them to be connected very well, it might be a bit difficult. So then you can just move them into the correct position and then bond them and they will move together. For instance, in the real world, you might just glue those parts together. Like let's say two cylinders that are perpendicular to one another on top of one another. And that's a bit difficult to constrain here. So you can just say, okay, move it into the correct position, bond them, and they are going to move together. I'm going to glue them in the real world. So something like that. Okay, so I hope this will put you on the right track. And yeah, we only have one example for this week. So since the assemblies won't be assessed in the test and so on, you're just going to have a few things to do. One example and one homework this week, one example and one homework next week. But you get more instructions about the specifically the homework in class. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and also try to do this part. It's quite simple. This would have been your homework, not the example. I'll talk about that in class. It's you should get the chuckle. I was quite frustrated. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your week.